The woman stood on his doorstep with her phone raised, threatening to call Child Protective Services on his wife for letting their 3-week-old daughter cry. She had no idea the exhausted father answering the door had spent 15 years in the most elite special operations unit in the world, or that her harassment campaign was about to unravel in ways she couldn't imagine. Connor Hayes stood in the nursery at 2 in the morning, gently bouncing his daughter Emma against his chest, while she screamed with the kind of primal fury only a newborn could muster. His wife Lindsay was finally asleep after 48 hours of broken rest, and he'd insisted on taking this shift despite his own bone-deep exhaustion. 3 weeks into fatherhood, and he'd faced down enemy combatants with more mercy than this tiny 7-pound human showed when she wanted to eat. He'd just gotten her settled when the doorbell rang. Connor froze. Emma's eyes popped open, and she immediately resumed crying. He checked his watch too, 14 a.m. Nobody rang doorbells at 2:14 a.m. unless something was catastrophically wrong. He carried Emma downstairs, already running through scenarios. His SEAL training never fully switched off, even on paternity leave. Through the front door's side window, he saw a woman in her late 50s wearing a bathrobe and an expression that suggested she'd swallowed something sour. He opened the door. "Can I help you?" "I'm Diane Pritchard from the HOA board," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "That baby has been crying for 2 hours straight. This is a residential neighborhood with noise ordinances." Connor stared at her, genuinely confused whether this was real or some sleep deprivation hallucination. "She's 3 weeks old." "I'm aware, and you need to control the situation. Some of us have to work in the morning." "She's a baby," Connor said slowly, as if explaining basic physics. "Bobbies cry, that's what they do." Diane's jaw tightened. The HOA covenant clearly states that residents must maintain reasonable noise levels between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I've documented 17 separate incidents over the past 2 weeks. Connor shifted Emma to his other shoulder, patting her back in the rhythmic way the lactation consultant had shown them. "You're documenting our newborn crying." "I'm documenting covenant violations. If this continues, there will be fines, escalating fines." Something cold settled in Connor's chest. He'd dealt with warlords and terrorists, but there was something uniquely disturbing about a woman who'd crawl out of bed at 2 in the morning to threaten a family with a newborn. "Is there anything else?" "Just be aware that I'm watching." Diane turned and walked back toward her house 4 doors down, her slippers scuffing against the sidewalk. Connor closed the door and looked down at Emma, who had finally started to settle. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Princess." The fines started arriving 3 days later. $50 for excessive noise disturbance on Tuesday night. Another $50 for Thursday. By the end of the second week, they'd accumulated $400 in HOA penalties, each one documented with timestamps and decibel readings that Diane had apparently measured from her own property. Lindsay sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the violation notices with shaking hands. She'd been crying, which immediately activated every protective instinct Connor possessed. "I don't understand what she wants from us. Emma needs to eat every 2 hours. She has colic. We can't just make her stop crying." Connor read through the latest notice. Diane had filed a formal complaint with the HOA board requesting a hearing to discuss chronic disturbances and possible inadequate childcare practices. "She's implying we're neglecting her," Lindsay said, her voice breaking. "Connor, what if she actually calls CPS? What if they believe her?" "They won't. There's nothing to believe." "You don't know that. I've read stories about vindictive neighbors making false reports, and even when they're proven wrong, it goes on your record. What if it affects your security clearance? What if?" Connor knelt beside her chair and took her hands. "Breathe. This woman is a bully with too much time and a clipboard. That's all she is." "She has power here, though. The HOA can put liens on the house. They can make our lives miserable." "Let me handle this." Lindsay met his eyes. "Handle it how?" "Legally, properly. I'm going to talk to her like a reasonable adult." "You already tried that." "Not really. I answered the door at 2 a.m. half asleep. This time I'll be prepared." Connor knocked on Diane's door at 10 a.m. on Saturday, after researching HOA law and reviewing their community covenant. She answered wearing gardening gloves and an expression that suggested she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Hayes, what can I do for you?" "I'd like to discuss the noise complaints. Is now a good time?" She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Her house was immaculate in the way that suggested no actual living happened there. Everything matched. Everything gleamed. Connor noticed the complete absence of photos, plants, or anything that might suggest warmth or personality. They sat in her living room. Diane removed her gloves with deliberate precision. "I assume you're here to negotiate the fines." "I'm here to explain that what you're doing is harassment. Our daughter is a newborn. The sounds she makes are completely normal and unavoidable. The covenant doesn't distinguish between types of noise. It simply requires residents to maintain peaceful enjoyment for their neighbors. Peaceful enjoyment doesn't mean absolute silence, especially when the noise source is a human infant who's legally protected under both federal and state law from the kind of restrictions you're trying to impose." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Are you threatening legal action?" "I'm explaining that you don't have the authority to fine us for our daughter crying. If you continue, we'll have grounds for a harassment claim, possibly intentional infliction of emotional distress, given that you know my wife just gave birth and is in a vulnerable state. Your wife seems unstable. I've heard her crying too." The temperature in the room dropped. Connor kept his voice level through sheer force of will. "Excuse me. I'm concerned about the welfare of that child. A mother who can't handle normal infant care, a father who's gone for months at a time on military deployments. It raises questions." "What questions?" "Whether that baby is in a safe environment." Connor stood. "If you contact Child Protective Services with false allegations, I'll pursue every legal remedy available. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Diane stood as well, unintimidated. "I've already contacted them. A caseworker is coming Tuesday to do a home visit. I'm sure if everything is as perfect as you claim, you have nothing to worry about." Connor sat in his truck outside Diane's house for 10 minutes, forcing his breathing back to normal. He'd maintained composure in firefights and hostage situations, but something about that woman's calculated cruelty had gotten under his skin. The idea that she'd actually called CPS on Lindsay, who was barely holding herself together after an emergency C-section and struggling with breastfeeding and postpartum recovery, made him want to put his fist through something. Instead, he called his former commanding officer, Marcus Webb, who transitioned to civilian life 5 years earlier and now ran a private security consultancy. "Hayes, how's fatherhood?" "Complicated. I need advice on a legal situation." He explained everything: the complaints, the fines, the CPS call. Marcus listened without interrupting. "Jesus," Marcus said when Connor finished. "This woman sounds like a piece of work, you documenting everything." "Started this morning. Timestamps, recordings where legal, written summaries of every interaction." "Good. Get a lawyer too, family law specialist who's handled CPS cases. Have them on standby before the home visit." "Already on my list." "Connor, I know you. I know how you operate when someone threatens your team. Don't do anything stupid." "I'm not going to touch her." "I didn't say touch, I said stupid. There's a difference." Connor almost smiled. "Noted." "How's Lindsay holding up?" "She's terrified. She's already blaming herself for Emma crying, for not being able to soothe her better, for somehow causing this situation. This CPS thing might break her." "Then you make sure the home visit goes perfectly. Clean house, organized documentation of all Emma's doctor visits, pediatrician on speed dial. Show them a functioning family with a healthy baby and a vindictive neighbor. That's all this is." "Thanks, Marcus. Call me after the visit. And Connor, if you need backup, you've got it. Half the old team is within driving distance." "We take care of our own." The CPS caseworker arrived Tuesday at 1 p.m. Her name was Angela Reeves, and she had the exhausted, seen-everything demeanor of someone who'd spent years in the trenches of child welfare. Connor had the house spotless, every piece of documentation organized in labeled folders, and Lindsay dressed and composed despite barely sleeping the night before. Emma, naturally, was having a good day and slept peacefully in her bassinet. Angela walked through the house, taking notes. She checked the nursery setup, asked about feeding schedules, examined Emma's weight tracking chart from her pediatrician visits. She was professional but not warm, and Connor couldn't read whether that was standard procedure or actual suspicion. "Can you explain the nature of the complaint?" Angela asked, sitting across from them in the living room. "Our neighbor filed it," Lindsay said quietly. "She's upset because Emma cries at night." "All Bobbies cry at night." "I've told her that. She doesn't care." Angela made a note. "Has there been any other conflict with this neighbor?" Connor handed her a folder. Complete documentation of every interaction, including the HOA violation notices, which we believe are retaliatory and baseless. Also included is Emma's complete medical history, our pediatrician's contact information, and character references from family and colleagues. Angela flipped through the folder, her expression shifting slightly. "This is very thorough. We wanted to make your job easier." The complaint specifically mentioned concerns about maternal mental health and paternal absence due to military service. Lindsay's hands clenched in her lap. Connor covered them with his own. "I'm active duty Navy," Connor said. "Currently on paternity leave for another 4 weeks. Before that, yes, I had deployments. That's part of my job. But I'm home now, and when I'm not, Lindsay has a strong support system. Her parents live 20 minutes away. We have friends in the area. She's not alone." "And you, Mrs. Hayes, how are you managing with a newborn?" Lindsay took a breath. "It's hard. I'm not going to lie and say it's not. Emma has colic. She cries a lot, especially at night. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But I love my daughter. I would never hurt her or neglect her. I'm doing everything I can." "Have you spoken with your doctor about how you're feeling?" "Yes, I saw her last week. She said what I'm experiencing is completely normal for the postpartum period. I'm not depressed. I'm just tired." Angela nodded slowly. "May I hold Emma?" Lindsay lifted their daughter from the bassinet and handed her over. Emma stirred but didn't wake. Angela examined her with practiced efficiency, checking muscle tone, skin condition, the umbilical cord stump that had just fallen off. "She's healthy," Angela said. "Well cared for, proper weight gain, no signs of distress or neglect." Lindsay's shoulders sagged with relief. Angela handed Emma back and closed her notebook. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I've been doing this work for 12 years. I've seen actual abuse and neglect. This isn't that. What you have here is a healthy baby with normal infant behaviors and a neighbor who's making your lives difficult for reasons I don't understand." "So the complaint is unfounded?" Connor asked. "The complaint is nonsense. I'll be filing that in my report. I'm also going to note that pursuing this further would constitute harassment of a vulnerable family. If your neighbor contacts us again with similar accusations, we'll consider it malicious reporting." After Angela left, Lindsay collapsed on the couch and cried for 20 minutes straight. Connor held her, feeling the tension drain from her body as the fear that had been consuming her finally released. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "She can't touch us." But even as he said it, Connor knew it wasn't over. Diane Pritchard had escalated this far. She wouldn't stop just because CPS had dismissed her complaint. People like her never stopped. They just changed tactics. The HOA hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Connor received the formal notice via certified mail, along with a detailed breakdown of all accumulated fines, now totaling $1,200, and a citation requiring them to appear before the board to address ongoing covenant violations and community disruption. Diane was listed as the primary complainant and would be presenting evidence of the violations. Connor hired an attorney named Patricia Vance, who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for not taking garbage from petty tyrants on power trips. She reviewed their case over coffee in the kitchen while Emma slept and Lindsay paced nervously. "This is one of the more absurd HOA complaints I've seen," Patricia said, flipping through Diane's documentation. "She's literally recorded your baby crying and submitted it as evidence, like it's some kind of crime." "Can they actually fine us for this?" Lindsay asked. "They can try. Whether it's enforceable is another question. The ADA, FHA, and several state laws protect families with children from housing discrimination. Fining you for a baby crying is arguably discriminatory, but HOAs have broad authority under their covenants, so we need to be strategic." "What's the strategy?" Connor asked. "We flip the script. They want to paint you as problem residents. We paint Diane Pritchard as the problem. Harassment, targeting, abuse of her position on the board. We bring witnesses, documentation, and we make it clear that continuing this campaign will result in legal action against both her and the HOA." "Will that work?" Patricia smiled grimly. "Depends on the board. If they're reasonable people, yes. If they're friends with Diane and willing to back her regardless of facts, we might have a fight." "I'm good at fighting," Connor said quietly. The hearing took place in the community center meeting room. 5 board members sat behind a long table. Diane was there, along with 3 other residents Connor recognized from the neighborhood. Patricia sat beside Connor and Lindsay, her briefcase open and organized. The board president, a retired accountant named Gerald Bronson, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address complaints filed by Mrs. Pritchard regarding noise violations at 847 Maple Drive, residents of Connor and Lindsay Hayes. Mrs. Pritchard, please present your case." Diane stood, holding a thick binder. "Over the past 4 weeks, the Hayes residence has generated excessive noise during restricted hours on 23 separate occasions. I have time-stamped recordings, decibel measurements, and testimony from other affected residents." She played a recording. Emma's cries echoed through the meeting room. Connor felt Lindsay flinch beside him. "As you can hear," Diane continued, "this is not occasional fussiness. This is sustained, high-volume noise that violates our community standards. I've attempted to address this directly with Mr. Hayes, who has been dismissive and hostile. When informal resolution failed, I escalated through proper channels, including a wellness check by Child Protective Services." "You called CPS on us," one of the other board members, a younger woman named Sandra Kim, interrupted. "For a baby crying." "I had concerns about the child's welfare, given the sustained distress." "Did CPS find anything?" Sandra asked. Diane's jaw tightened. The caseworker determined no immediate action was necessary. However, that doesn't address the noise issue affecting this community. Gerald looked at Connor. "Mr. Hayes, would you like to respond?" Connor stood. "Our daughter is 3 weeks old. She has colic. She cries. We're doing everything medically recommended to help her, but we can't make her stop. Mrs. Pritchard has chosen to weaponize normal infant behavior to harass my family, including making a false CPS report that traumatized my wife, who just had major surgery and is recovering while caring for a newborn." "The report wasn't false," Diane snapped. "I had legitimate concerns." CPS disagreed. Patricia stood smoothly. "If I may address the board, I'm Patricia Vance, representing the Hayes family. What we have here is straightforward housing discrimination. Federal law, specifically the Fair Housing Act, prohibits discrimination against families with children. That includes imposing different standards or restrictions based on the presence of children in a household. Fining my clients because their infant cries is textbook discrimination." Gerald frowned. "Mrs. Vance, we're not discriminating. We're enforcing our noise covenant." "Against a baby, would you fine someone for snoring, for coughing when they're sick, for their dog barking occasionally?" "We fine people for excessive dog barking," Diane said. "After warnings and reasonable accommodation periods, I assume." "How much accommodation have you offered my clients? You went straight to fines and CPS calls." Sandra leaned forward. "Mrs. Pritchard, why did you start documenting this in the first place? Most people understand Bobby's cry. They're annoying, sure, but it's temporary." Because I have a right to peaceful enjoyment of my property. 4 doors away. Diane's face flushed. The noise carries. One of the other residents Diane had brought, an older man Connor didn't recognize, cleared his throat. Actually, I need to say something. Diane asked me to come here and support her complaint. She told me the Hayes family was having loud parties and disturbing everyone. When I found out this was about a baby, I told her I wouldn't participate. This is ridiculous. The second resident nodded. Same. I have grandchildren, Bobby's cry. This isn't a legitimate complaint. Diane looked like she'd been slapped. You both agreed to come. Under false pretenses, the man said. Gerald sighed heavily. Mrs. Pritchard, I'm going to be frank. This board has better things to do than referee grudges against infants. The fines are rescinded. The complaint is dismissed. And if you continue to harass the Hayes family, we'll have a different conversation about your position on this board. Diane shot to her feet. You can't be serious. I've served this community for 8 years. And in those 8 years, you've filed 47 complaints against various residents, most of which were dismissed as frivolous. We've tolerated it because you also do good work on beautification and maintenance. But calling CPS on a new mother crosses a line. This is over. Connor thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Diane Pritchard didn't strike him as someone who accepted defeat gracefully, and he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. So he wasn't entirely surprised when, 3 days after the hearing, his truck was keyed in the driveway. Long, deliberate scratches across both sides. He also wasn't surprised when their garbage cans kept getting knocked over, or when someone filed an anonymous complaint with the city about their lawn being a 1/4 inch too long, or when Lindsay started receiving hang-up calls from a blocked number at odd hours. What did surprise him was the restraint he was showing. Old Connor, pre-fatherhood Connor, might have handled this differently, but he had a daughter now, a family. He couldn't afford to be the guy who escalated neighborhood disputes into something that might end with police involvement or worse. He could, however, be methodical. Connor installed security cameras covering every angle of their property. He documented every incident. He filed reports with the non-emergency police line, and he waited. 2 weeks after the hearing, Diane made her mistake. Connor was out running errands when Lindsay called, her voice shaking. Someone's in our backyard. He was home in 4 minutes, violating every speed limit. He found Lindsay standing inside the back door with Emma in her arms, staring out at their yard, where Diane was photographing their fence line with a professional camera. Connor stepped outside. What are you doing on my property? Diane didn't look up. Your fence is 6 inches over the property line. I'm documenting it for a formal complaint. We had the property surveyed when we bought the house. The fence is exactly where it should be. I had it surveyed last week. You're encroaching. Show me the survey. I don't have to show you anything. Connor pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need police at 847 Maple Drive. Someone is trespassing in my backyard and refusing to leave. Diane's head snapped up. You can't have me arrested for walking on common property. This isn't common property. This is my yard. You're trespassing. I'm a member of the HOA board, conducting official business. You were removed from the board 2 days ago. Didn't they tell you? Based on the expression on Diane's face, they had not. Connor had heard through Sandra Kim, who'd reached out to apologize for the whole situation, that Gerald had called an emergency vote after discovering Diane had been conducting unauthorized inspections of other properties and harassing multiple residents. The vote had been unanimous. The police arrived 6 minutes later. By then, Diane was standing on the sidewalk, insisting she'd done nothing wrong and that Connor was the aggressor. The officer, a patient woman named Rodriguez, listened to both sides and then asked to see Connor's security footage. He pulled it up on his phone. Clear video of Diane entering through their side gate, walking around their yard for several minutes, taking photos. Ma'am, Rodriguez said to Diane, this is trespassing. I'm going to issue you a citation. This is harassment. He's targeting me because I tried to hold him accountable for having a baby that cries. Diane's mouth opened and closed. Rodriguez wrote the citation with the same expression Connor recognized from his own training days, the look of someone dealing with nonsense and running out of patience for it. She handed it to Diane. Stay off their property. No contact. If there are legitimate HOA issues, they go through official channels with other board members present. Understand? After Diane left, Rodriguez turned to Connor. Get a restraining order. You've got documentation, witnesses, and now a police record. Judge will grant it. Will that actually stop her? Probably not, but it gives you legal recourse when she violates it, and she will violate it. People like her always do. The temporary restraining order was granted within 48 hours. Diane was served by a sheriff's deputy and barred from coming within 100 yards of Connor, Lindsay, Emma, or their property. The hearing for a permanent order was scheduled for 2 weeks out. For those 2 weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. Connor knew Diane was planning something, but he couldn't figure out what. She'd exhausted all her official channels. She'd been kicked off the HOA board. She had a criminal citation and a restraining order. What else could she do? The answer came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Connor woke to Emma screaming and the sound of sirens. He grabbed his phone and saw 5 missed calls from their security system. He pulled up the camera feed and saw fire trucks in front of their house. He threw on clothes and ran downstairs. Lindsay was already there, holding Emma, talking to a firefighter in the doorway. False alarm, the firefighter was saying. Someone called in a structure fire at this address. We found nothing. Someone called it in, Connor asked. Anonymous tip. Said they saw flames from the second story. Connor pulled up his security footage and scrolled backward. At 2:47 a.m., a car had pulled up across the street. Someone got out, made a phone call, then got back in and drove away. The license plate was clearly visible. Diane's car. The firefighter saw Connor's expression. You know who made the call. I have video and a pretty good idea. We take false emergency calls seriously. That's resources pulled from actual emergencies. You should file a report. Connor did immediately. He also sent the footage to Patricia Vance and to Rodriguez, who'd given him her card after the trespassing incident. Rodriguez showed up at 7 a.m. after her shift ended. She looked exhausted but determined. I saw your report. Also got a call from dispatch about the fire department incident. This woman isn't stopping. No. The restraining order hearing is Monday. Yes. Bring everything. Every piece of documentation, every video, every witness. We're going to bury her. Diane's attorney was a slick corporate type named Richard Fenton, who clearly thought this entire proceeding was beneath him. He'd probably been expecting an easy hearing. Confused homeowners versus his experienced HOA board member client. Quick dismissal. Everyone moves on. What he got was Patricia Vance with 3 thick binders, a timeline poster board, and a witness list that included 2 police officers, a CPS caseworker, and 4 neighbors. The judge was the Honorable Margaret Chen, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for having zero patience for nonsense in her courtroom. Patricia presented their case methodically. The initial complaints, the escalation to CPS, the HOA hearing, the harassment afterward, the trespassing, the false emergency call. Each incident was backed by documentation, video evidence, or witness testimony. Angela Reeves, the CPS caseworker, testified that the initial complaint had been baseless and appeared retaliatory. Rodriguez testified about the trespassing and the pattern of harassment. The neighbors testified about Diane's history of complaints and aggressive behavior toward multiple residents. Fenton tried to paint Diane as a concerned community member who'd been unfairly targeted by an aggressive military veteran with anger issues. He implied that Connor had intimidated his client, that the Hayes family were problem residents who refused to follow community rules. Then Patricia called Connor to the stand. Mr. Hayes, can you describe your military service? I'm a Navy SEAL, 15 years active duty, multiple deployments. In your experience, how do you handle conflict? With de-escalation when possible, force only when necessary and proportionate. Did you ever threaten Mrs. Pritchard? No. Did you ever use intimidation tactics? No. I asked her politely to stop harassing my family. When she didn't, I pursued legal channels. Why not handle this differently? Connor looked directly at Judge Chen. Because I have a daughter now. My job is to protect her, not to prove anything to someone who wants a fight. Mrs. Pritchard kept escalating, and every time she did, I responded through proper legal mechanisms. That's what you're supposed to do in a civilized society. Fenton cross-examined aggressively, trying to trip Connor up or provoke a reaction. Connor had been interrogated by actual enemies. This lawyer wasn't even close to challenging. When testimony concluded, Judge Chen reviewed the evidence for several minutes, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Pritchard, she finally said, do you have anything to say before I make my ruling? Diane stood. She looked smaller than Connor remembered, diminished somehow. Your Honor, I've lived in that neighborhood for 20 years. I've worked hard to maintain property values and community standards. These people moved in and immediately started causing problems. I was trying to protect my community. By calling Child Protective Services on a newborn baby. I had concerns that were investigated and found to be baseless. Mrs. Pritchard, I've reviewed this entire case, and what I see is a pattern of escalating harassment against a young family. You didn't like that their baby cried, so you weaponized every bit of authority and influence you had to punish them. When official channels didn't work, you turned to harassment and intimidation. When that didn't work, you committed criminal acts. Your Honor, I never. You filed a false emergency report. That's a crime. You trespassed on their property after being warned. You violated the temporary restraining order twice. Yes, I saw the reports from last week. You seem to believe the rules don't apply to you. Judge Chen signed the document in front of her. I'm granting a permanent restraining order. Mrs. Pritchard, you are to have no contact with Connor Hayes, Lindsay Hayes, or their minor child. You are not to go within 200 yards of their residence. You are not to contact them directly or indirectly, through third parties, social media, or any other means. Violation will result in immediate arrest and criminal prosecution. Do you understand? Diane's face had gone white. 200 yards? That's my entire neighborhood. I'd have to take a different route to leave my own house. Then you should have thought of that before you engaged in systematic harassment. This is outrageous. Mrs. Pritchard, I'm also referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges related to the false emergency report. You're dismissed. Connor thought that would finally be the end. Judge's orders were clear. Diane faced potential criminal charges. She'd lost her power base in the HOA. Surely even she would recognize when to quit. But he'd underestimated the depth of her obsession. 3 days after the hearing, Connor was doing yard work when he noticed a car parked down the street with someone sitting in it, watching their house. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but something about the situation set off alarm bells. He went inside, pulled up his security system, and zoomed in on the license plate. Not Diane's car. He ran it through a database Marcus had given him access to, registered to a private investigation firm. She'd hired someone to watch them. Connor called Patricia immediately. She's got a PI surveilling our house. That might not be illegal, depending on what they're doing. It violates the spirit of the restraining order. Spirit and letter are different things. If they're on public property and not making contact, it's gray area. Document it, but don't engage. Connor documented everything. The PI showed up every day for a week, always parking on public streets, always just watching. Connor recognized the tactic. It was psychological warfare. She couldn't contact them directly, so she was making sure they knew they were being watched, trying to make them feel unsafe in their own home. It was working on Lindsay. She started keeping the curtains closed, jumping at every sound. The stress was affecting her ability to sleep even when Emma was sleeping. Connor could see her unraveling. On the 8th day, Connor made a decision. He walked out to the Pye's car and knocked on the window. The guy rolled it down. He was young, maybe 30, with the bored expression of someone doing a job he didn't care about. "I'm Connor Hayes. I assume you know who I am." "Can't talk to you, man. I know about the restraining order." "I'm not asking you to contact me. I'm just curious what exactly you're being paid to accomplish here." The Pye shrugged. "Just documenting your activities, comings and goings, visitors, that kind of thing." "For what purpose?" "Lady says she needs it for a lawsuit she's planning. Something about defamation and emotional distress. Not my business to judge." Connor nodded slowly. "You know she's been charged with filing false emergency reports, that she was removed from her HOA board for harassment, that there's a restraining order because she couldn't stop targeting my family." "Not my problem." "Fair enough, but you should know that I've documented your vehicle and your activities here every day for the past week. If this escalates into anything that affects my family's safety or well-being, you're going to be part of that legal chain. Just something to consider." "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm giving you information so you can make informed decisions about your employment." Connor walked back inside. That night, he didn't see the Pye's car, or the next night. Whatever he'd said had apparently been enough. But Diane wasn't done. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Diane was suing them for defamation, claiming that Connor had maliciously destroyed her reputation by making false statements to the HOA board and to police. She was seeking $50,000 in damages plus legal fees. Patricia read the complaint and laughed. "This is legally frivolous. Every statement your husband made was either provably true or protected opinion. She won't win." "But we have to defend it," Lindsay asked. "Yes, which costs money and time. That's the point. She knows she can't win, but she can make you bleed resources and stress." Connor sat at their kitchen table, doing math. Patricia's fees, court costs, time off work for depositions and hearings. Even if they won, this would cost thousands of dollars they didn't have budgeted, while Lindsay was on unpaid maternity leave. "Can we countersue?" he asked. "For what?" "Abuse of process, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, whatever actually applies." Patricia considered that. "We could. It would escalate things considerably. Are you sure you want to go there?" Connor looked at Lindsay, who was holding Emma and crying silently. His wife had lost 15 pounds since this started. She had dark circles under her eyes that had nothing to do with normal new parent exhaustion. She flinched at the sound of the doorbell. "Yes," he said, "I want to go there." The countersuit was comprehensive. Patricia filed claims for harassment, abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. They requested damages for emotional harm, medical expenses related to Lindsay's stress-related health issues, and attorney's fees. They also filed a complaint with the private investigation company Diane had hired, which apparently hadn't known about the restraining order. The company immediately dropped her as a client and provided Connor with all the surveillance records, which showed the Pye had been documenting them for 3 weeks, not just the 8 days Connor had been aware of. Marcus helped Connor build the case in ways Patricia couldn't officially endorse, but also couldn't technically prevent. Call records showing the pattern of hang-ups to Lindsay's phone from numbers that traced back to burner phones purchased near Diane's house. Social media posts from Diane's locked Facebook account, provided by a mutual neighbor who was disgusted by the whole situation, that referred to entitled military families who think they're above community rules. Most damning was an email chain Patricia obtained through discovery. Diane had corresponded with 3 other HOA board members before the hearing, explicitly stating her intention to make an example of the Hayes family, to discourage other young families with children from lowering neighborhood standards. It was discrimination in writing. "This is actually amazing," Patricia said, reading through the emails. She basically confessed to violating fair housing law in a documented chain with witnesses. "Can we use this?" "Absolutely. I'm also forwarding this to HUD. This might trigger a federal investigation into the HOA's practices. Will that affect other residents?